Okay. And let's begin, even though I see it there, how it's spelled. Can I have you say and spell first and last name, and then give me your official title, however you want to be identified?
Yeah. So my name is Adam Ramey. Last name spelled Ramey. I'm Associate Dean of Social Science and an Associate Professor of Political Science at NYU Abu Dhabi.
Okay. I want to begin with just your sort of overall kind of what we were just doing off camera. Um, what have you noticed in terms of the just everyday difference in people's lives here? And I want to frame that with this. Obviously, we get these alerts every night about Iranian missiles and drones incoming. There have been sort of relatively low numbers of people actually killed, direct strikes. We haven't seen much of that, but still it's impacting life here. So what have you noticed as not just someone in your role, but someone who's lived here for more than a decade?
Yeah, I would say that like the first couple of days were especially nerve-wracking because we've never dealt with something like this. I mean, I was here during the pandemic, and that there's a similar vibe to that in the sense that there was a tremendous uncertainty taking us by surprise, not sure how long things were going to last for. But in that same way, I think that as the days moved on, I think that we acclimated to the situation. You know, my wife and I during the first 2 days, and now granted, also the frequency of attacks and the volume of attacks was much higher at that time. But the first night when we got woken up and we got the alert on the phone, we got a go bag and we got our dog and we ran to the basement. And now we are over 2 weeks later, and we just we haven't fortunately had too many very many of those nighttime alerts, but when they do happen, we just stay in bed, to be honest. We've kind of adapted in that way. I mean, we try to, and most of the people in our social circle try to not just be in open spaces too much, just to, so that we're always close to a building if we need to get inside when the alerts happen. But I would say that, we've kind of gone from kind of a shelter in place attitude to one in which, I'm in my office right now. I didn't leave really, the area around my home for the first week or so. Now I'm coming to the office pretty regularly. My wife is going to yoga. We're trying to have some sort of sense of normalcy, and I think a lot of others are as well. But there really is a variance, right? There's some people who are literally doing nothing differently in their lives, and there are some people, again, very kind of reminiscent of the COVID era, who are just staying home and avoiding as much exposure to the outside world as possible.
Uh, Given that you study political science and you teach it, and this is your field, it always seems from an American perspective, the Gulf region is such a contradiction in so many ways. And one of those is that over the last few years, their relationship with the United States and this administration, has really gone further than I think most people have expected. So very good relations with the Trump administration, also friendly relations with the Iranian government and with the regime up until now, and obviously every day you've got missiles coming in from Iran. What do you think the long-term impacts are going to be in terms of the relationships with the governments on both sides of this?
I think that there's one of the things I've had to explain to a lot of family and friends back in the U.S. is that I think that many of them saw all of this um, the blowback from these attacks that all the Gulf countries have received, but the UAE, where we are here, has received a disproportionate share of the strikes. I think that a lot of friends and family back home assume that this is going to make the Gulf countries rethink their strategic partnerships with the United States, and I actually don't think that that's the case. There might be individual countries that might veer off the path a little bit, but I think that what many of the countries in the region are seeing is that there's been despite having relations with Iran and there was the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia in particular, but really all the GCC countries in Iran several years back that was mediated by China. I think that on the one hand, there was a desire to have some stability in the region and to try to reach an accord of some type. But I do think that in back channels there was always a little bit of suspicion, and I think that there was a fear that if something were to happen, this would be the first place that Iran would strike. And I think that what the February 28th demonstrated to us all was that that's exactly what Iran would do. And I think that in the long term, I think the GCC countries are really going to want to ensure security and stability in shipping in the Gulf and in airspace. I think that before this crisis began, I think that most Gulf countries were just interested in Iran not acquiring nuclear weapons, and we've had direct statements by GCC leaders, especially those from the UAE, saying that, yeah, now we also don't just want that. We want to make sure we want commitments that Iran is not going to be able to replenish its stockpiles of drones and missiles that they can just lob over the Gulf whenever they feel like it. So I feel, obviously things could change, but I think if, given how things have gone so far, I think that there will be a strengthening of ties with Washington after this. Though obviously, whatever damage has been done to U.S. military bases in the region will have to be repaired. And I think that in whatever kind of ceasefire and peace agreement that comes out of this in the end, there will be an expectation of protection of Gulf assets and keeping them out of things. I think it's also entirely possible that there might be some efforts to try to in a defensive way to bind the GCC together in ways that has not been the case as of yet. I think that the GCC is like a kind of a weaker version of the EU. At least that's how it's been to date. And I think there will be a desire to bring more unity in that front to help to weather any future storms. But I think primarily they don't want future storms. And I think a desire to really contain Iran once and for all is really what they're looking at now.
So to overly simplify, you don't think there's blaming of the United States for initiating this conflict. There's more blame on Iran for the fact that they're getting missiles every day. And that is, in their view, the disruption to their economy and their regular oil flows and all of that. Not much animosity. You don't see it right now, anyway, toward the United States.
Generally not. I mean, I think that had Iran not retaliated by striking its neighbors on February 28th and thereafter, I think that you would have had a lot of condemnation from many capitals here in the GCC and a strong desire to bring people back to the negotiating table. But the reality is every single Gulf country, even Oman, which has been really the most neutral of the neutral countries, has seen strikes since the conflict began. And even Qatar, which really has tried to play a really strong role at bringing together warring parties. That first with the Israelis and Palestinians, particularly the Hamas leadership, to end the crisis in Gaza, and then in the lead up to this, to try to really play a mediating role. They've said repeatedly, we can't mediate if you're still attacking us. And so I think that because Iran continues to strangle energy markets, it continues to strike its neighbors, it puts the focus on them. Even if there is privately misgivings about U.S. and or Israeli attacks, Iran is the focus, and the longer they drag this out, the longer they're going to the deeper a wedge they're going to drive in the long term between the GCC nations and Iran.
And what about with Israel? Is it the same level as the United States, or is there still some animosity given everything that happened in Gaza and even now several Lebanese neighborhoods? What is the situation there?
Well, it's a tricky one, right? I mean, so the UAE and Bahrain signed on to the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration, and I think that this conflict is in the long run likely going to deepen those ties. Particularly because of a desire to preserve national security. The Saudis and Israelis were engaged in talks that until a couple of months, until a couple of months ago, there was still some optimism about, and then it seemed like those talks were almost indefinitely on hold. But I think that again, it really kind of depends on how bad this gets at this stage. But I think that ultimately, many countries are going to have to, even if begrudgingly, accept some sort of negotiated peace deal with Israel as a way of sort of maintaining stability and prosperity in the broader region. How quickly or how that turns out, I think, is going to really depend on, like you said, on one hand, how bad the conflict escalates, if it does, with Iran on the one hand, and I think Israel's conduct of its ground invasion in Lebanon that it's just begun, I think, is also going to matter as well. If Israel really confines its attacks to taking out Hezbollah and spares most of the other Lebanese population from those attacks, I think that could be a starting point for conversations, not just with the GCC, but even with the Lebanese government. But on the other hand, if things get fairly indiscriminate, and only time will tell, I think that might make any sort of rapprochement with Israel for countries that don't already have ties a hard sell in the long run.
Some of the Iranian drone attacks seem to be very strategically targeted. You've had the financial sector here in Dubai. You've had Fujairah three times in the last 4 or 5 days. So obviously, oil export hub. And then you've had the airport, and obviously tourism and Emirates is a huge part of the Dubai economy. Does the economy recover? Could there be long-term damages to it? And do you think that Iran's targets show that they're not necessarily going for blood and loss of life and casualties, but they are very sort of strategically trying to choke off their Dubai's economic lifelines and the UAE's economic lifelines?
I mean, they are. I mean, despite their rhetoric saying they're only focused on military targets and U.S. assets, the reality is they've struck refineries, they've struck shipping ports, they've struck airports, they've struck hotels. Now they claim that those hotels are housing U.S. troops, or in some cases they claim Mossad agents. All kinds of interesting theories, but the reality is that they're not confining their strikes to military targets, and so. Um, I do believe. I think the UAE has the wherewithal to bounce back. I think that there's a long-term strategic vision. I think the UAE government has really done an exceptional job in sort of maintaining public order and confidence in institutions and infrastructure, despite the disruptions that we've seen. So I think that bodes well for the residents who remain here in the long run. And I think that, again, assuming that there is a solution that is able to contain Iranian aggression in the long term, I think that the tourism and the travel industry, which is really a linchpin of UAE's diversification away from oil and natural gas, um, I do believe that it will come back. Because the reality is, I mean, Emirates and Qatar and Etihad Airlines are responsible not only for ferrying people to and from the Gulf in direct traffic, but ferrying people from one part of the world to the other. And that's why when the airspace was shut in the first few days of the conflict, it wasn't just flights to one-way flights to get out of here that were affected. There were passengers stranded all over the world. And the scale of the network that Emirates in particular, but also Qatar and Etihad have built, mean that if there isn't a bounce back, it's going to have significant repercussions, not just for here, but the entire global travel market. So I think that they're going to. I think that the leadership here is well aware of these facts and will do everything in their power to restore confidence in the region. I think that. One of the upsides to all of this, and I do believe that this will be something that will be touted by leadership of not only the airlines but the country going forward, is that yes, things are bad, and this is a terrible situation that we find ourselves in. But even in this terrible situation, there still is stability. There is still well running infrastructure. The government has shown real nimbleness and flexibility in policy making. So, for example, individuals who are stuck outside the country, they can renew their visas electronically. They don't need to physically come in person. They're responding very dynamically to this, and I think that when all is said and done, that will be a major selling point to restore confidence.
Um, I've noticed um, the government here has there have been several reports of arrests of people who have filmed some of the damage from these strikes or the fires from Fujara. Sometimes it's journalists, sometimes it's regular citizens, sometimes it's visitors to the country, but they're being arrested for that. Um, does it seem like that is an effort to limit the sort of damage and do like a PR, control thing, to put a better face on, what is a tough situation right now for tourism and all that, to say nothing to see here, everything is fine, and sort of sending a message to people not to post these videos or pictures. Do you see that as problematic, and do you accept that premise that that's what's going on here?
So I think that there's like two dimensions to this. So one is like even if we were in peacetime, I've been here for 14 years, and it was made very abundantly clear to me from the first time I arrived that um, photographing people or private residences and things like this without permission of the owner and then posting them on social media is just it's against the law, and that's not something that's unique to the UAE. It is the way things are in the entire Gulf and other parts of the Middle East, and I'm sure other parts of the world as well. Um, and and so that's that, and then you add on top of that we are in a time of conflict. I will say the government, the first week of the conflict, really went out of its way in social media, in SMS and WhatsApp messaging. They really tried to convey to people, please do not record and distribute this content via social media channels. They really tried to push it, and people kept doing it anyway. And I think that their prohibition on it, particularly in the war context, is driven by a few different dimensions. So one is, well, it's free intelligence to the enemy. I mean, we are still in a time of conflict, and showing what damage has been done in a public setting is free intel to the enemy. I think the second thing it does is, we want to maintain public order, and one thing that catastrophizing can do, especially because a lot of these photos and videos that have been shared, or some of them are direct photos and videos of strikes, but some of them are AI edited or modified, can stir up panic, and that potentially is a threat to maintaining public order. Um, and I think that it's not that the government has not tried to hide anything. I think that they've been very transparent, and they report every single day the number of strikes, if there's been casualties, what the casualties are. And if there are strikes that affect a particular area, they're on it. In fact, the official social media channels of the National Center for Emergency Management puts out content and says we're dealing with a fire at Dubai Airport or whatever. They're very clear, even in real time, about what's going on, but they want to make sure that people get that information from official channels and don't get themselves all worked up over stuff that actually might not even be true. And that's another really, really important point. One of the ways that my wife and I and our friends have been able to sort of, keep calm and keep our sanity at this time is because things are calm around us. There's a sense of order and stability. And if we were to just be, constantly inundated with photos and videos of conflicts, some of which that aren't even happy, aren't even real, or misattributed, it would probably have a really negative effect on our mental health, and that would certainly not bode well, for us individually. But if you sort of spread that out to a country of 11 million people, that would be, potentially disastrous.
Adam, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say or something that should be conveyed that we didn't talk about? I'll just give you the floor. And you don't have to, but if there is anything else you want to add,
Sure.
I'll just.
I mean, I'll throw it in, and feel free to use what you want to. I mean, I think that a lot, especially for people who aren't here on the ground, especially people back in the United States, I think a lot of the conversation has been about, the U.S. and Israel's attacks on Iran whether it should be happening, whether it should have happened in the first place, and whether it should continue to be happening. And I understand that that those are debates that should happen, and that's part of the American political system. But I think it's really important for folks to understand that there is another dimension to this conflict, and that is the neighbors of Iran, the GCC, but also Azerbaijan and Turkey and Cyprus, even out in the Mediterranean, have found themselves repeatedly attacked, over the last 2.5 weeks, and unprovoked attacks. By the way, we're not combatants; we are innocent bystanders. And while the United States and Israel have confined their attacks on Iran and on the one hand and Hezbollah on the other, um, Iran has not confined its attacks on U.S. and Israeli assets, and it really is creating a very difficult social and economic and physical harm situation for all people who are in the Gulf. So I think that the UN has voted unanimously in the Security Council. I mean, Russia and China abstained, but it voted unanimously, save for them, to condemn Iran's attacks. 135 countries signed on to co-sponsor that resolution in the General Assembly. And I think that this is something that shouldn't be lost. This is not a faraway set of circumstances that don't affect Americans. There are tens of thousands of Americans who live all across the Middle East and North Africa, and so much of not only the world's oil, but the world's shipping, the world's airlines, technology. Dubai is a major hub for major tech companies like Google and Microsoft, and we just got Starlink, thanks to Elon Musk. That was announced just, I believe, today. Um, what happens here has real repercussions for the rest of the world, and so I hope that that's not lost while we have these broader debates about U.S. foreign policy.
Adam, thank you so much. This was really helpful.
Great,
I'm going to stop the recording.
cool.
Let's see. Stop recording.